I am acutely aware that I stand between you and lunch. Okay, so hopefully this won't be too painful, and then we can discuss it over lunch, loaded fries, the rest of it. I'm going to talk to you about feedback loops, and I'm going to talk to you specifically about my experience in my previous career and how I guess I take it into the career I've currently got as an Agile coach. As all good, I guess, ex-military presentations, there's kind of a scope, which we're going to cover. I'm going to talk about my journey into agility, because I think it's important. And then, as I say, we're going to get into the main meat of the presentation, which is talking about feedback loops. So, I grew up in North Wales, just went to a very average school. Shout out everyone who went to North Wales. I went to high school in Rhyl, so you're right, I'm lucky to be alive. I decided it would be safer for me to join the military. So at 16 years old, I joined the military. And when I went into the careers office, the sergeant in there said to me, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I'm at college, and I think I'd like to be a physiotherapist." And he said, "So you're interested in medical work?" Bear in mind, I was 16 years old. I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll take that." He pulled out a small folder, and on the top of it said, "Combat Medical Technician." And as a 16-year-old who went to school in Rhyl, these were the three coolest words I think I'd ever heard. So I was totally hook, line, and sinker, and then started my military career. I served for 23 years in total, including 2 operational deployments to the Balkans, over in Kosovo. I deployed to Iraq a number of times, Afghanistan a number of times, and I also served for 9 months in Yemen, working with the counter-terrorism team over there, training counter-terrorism. So that's my background in the clinical space. With regards to a career highlight in the military, I was fortunate enough to serve at Hereford, and I was a medical training officer for UK Special Forces. What that made me do was look at how I can improve the training that was getting delivered. So one of the things I'm very proud of is I fell into Agile ways of working as a way of improving the offer of training, but in a way of, can we make it some accreditation to it? Can we give it a little bit of credibility outside of the military? Because a lot of things for people, if anyone has military experience, are good in the military and not so good when we get out. These are my training team in the sort of picture in the top left, and I said we're going to do this differently. And I guess I applied a Scrum minus framework, okay, which essentially for them meant we're going to work in smaller sprints to deliver the work. You're not going to stick in your silos with the work that you deliver, and we're going to kind of be blended as a high-performing team. That was the plan. And this was very successful. And it got to a point where I thought, actually, I think I want to do this outside of the military. The military is a very old-school organization. To affect real change is quite difficult, quite legacy, and there's a lot of things to jump through. And I fell in love with this Agile ways of working, so I decided to leave. Since leaving, I was fortunate enough to work with Capgemini Financial Services. There are a number of people in here who I've worked with in Capgemini, and that's great. And it's great to see you again. And I did a number of things using my transferable skills to the military into my role as an Agile coach. So lots of experience in training, lots of experience in coaching, and all of that good stuff. I guess the reason I wanted to do a bit of an intro was to just ensure there was that level of credibility in what I'm talking about, okay? So what we're going to go on to with regards to feedback loops and my specific experience is something that I've been involved in every single step of the process, okay? Every single step from the very beginning right to the very end before I left the service, and all will come apparent as we get into it. Where we were with pre-hospital emergency care when I joined the military. So we just did things the same way we always did things. We had kit that looked like it came from the First and Second World War. We used stretchers that were made of wood. Our kit was very antiquated. Okay, this photo was in Kosovo when I was 17 years old, and the kit and equipment we used, including what's in the top corner there, for blood loss, I guess, was this thing here. This is a Samway anchor tourniquet. Okay, it came into service in around 1958. I joined the army in 1998. Okay, anything that's been in service for 40 years tells me that A, it's old and not effective, and B, why have we still got it? And the reality was when I joined as a young combat medical technician, tourniquets were bad. It was like frowned upon. You don't use tourniquets, ever. Because you put a tourniquet on, you will die. Your leg will fall off. Put a tourniquet on your hand, your arm will fall off. We're going to use dressings. These dressings here, okay, which you need to be seriously strong just to open those things. But this is what we got issued. And the feedback loop for when we deployed, because we deploy in operations for 6 months, around 6 months, was essentially we would deploy with our unit, our group of people. We would do some stuff. We would do some more stuff, do some other stuff, and then we would write a report to hand over to the next people who were coming out. The feedback loop was essentially 6 months. Let's say my first deployment, my unit's around 150 strong. We deployed for 6 months to Pristina. We handed over to the next lot for the Christmas shift. We didn't really care about what we were handing over to them. Didn't really care. It was more like, there's your tents, there's your vehicles. It's all going to go into this really important post-operational tour report, okay? Which was a lengthy document. It was about data that had captured on the tour. It was a document, paper, printed. From all the different outstations, we all came in and said, there you go, add that annex to your report. Talked about statistics, trends, guidance, hints and tips. No one would read it. Nobody, because you didn't care. You didn't think, I need all this data, I need this information to go into my next operation. And this happened throughout all the tours in the Balkans. It happened before that. Arguably, I would say it happened before my time. Because when I joined at 16, 17 years old, there was people in the military who were significantly older, and they swore by it doing it this way. But things only work until they don't work. And the whole character of conflict changed. We needed to change how we do things. Okay? 9/11 happened. Iraq, Afghanistan happened, okay? And what did that mean? Why did we need to change? What were we seeing from a clinical pre-hospital care point of view? So the what? Essentially, improvised explosive devices. We started engaging with a non-peer-on-peer adversary. We couldn't see the enemy. It didn't matter how good our kit and equipment were. We were fighting against people who were dressed just like the local population, using things that we weren't used to, improvised explosive devices, some low metal contents. You couldn't even find them with a metal detector. This was the military, the problems we were facing, vehicles that weren't fit for purpose in this environment. You're talking about old Russian landmines and shells that were getting used. This isn't like a high-tech bomb factory. This was the ability to make complex weapons, really difficult to defend against weapons out of old legacy stuff. It made it very difficult. What did that mean from a clinical point of view? Well, vehicles would get blown up. People started suffering injuries that we weren't used to. I mean, armies and wars really simple. It's like, we've got guns and tanks, and you've got guns and tanks, and hopefully our guns are better than your guns, and our tanks are better than your tanks, and then someone somewhere will win. This changed everything. So what? So what? Well, from a clinical point of view and a medical point of view, we had a problem. This is the so what. Now, you'll have all seen plenty of this on TV, you know, anything from around 2004 to around 2015. And this is people were dying. Lots of soldiers were dying. Okay, they were dying in operations in numbers that we were not expecting. This was happening daily, weekly. The numbers of people that were either repatriated in theatre and then driven through the streets of Rawest and Bassett. We didn't want to see it. And it's a problem because we're the people delivering care. We're the people in that pre-hospital space doing something about it. We're the people expected to save lives. And we didn't have the skills, or should I say we didn't have the equipment or the knowledge to do something about it. But now we had a significant amount of data. So now what? What are we going to do about it? We can't just let this happen. We can't just pull out. Okay, we've got to do something about it. And what did we do? Well, we had the data now, we had the information, and we needed to do something about it rapidly. So we looked at our feedback loops. Usually this was 6 months. This was a report. This was paperwork. These are casualties. We had this many people had diarrhea and vomiting. This many people were shot. This many people were involved in RTCs. This many people were drunk. Okay? But this didn't happen. The whole concept changed. So the feedback loops were shortened. But how did we shorten them? 6 months was too long. We can't afford to lose a significant amount of soldiers and people to get significant injuries. So we shortened them. We had two conflicts happening in parallel in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, and we also had a hub in the UK where casualties were getting sent to, and that was the Royal Hospital in Birmingham, RCDM. So the feedback loop was shortened to a single week. A single week. And the way they changed this feedback loop was a video call from Afghanistan, from Iraq, York, where the training centre is, and the Royal Hospital. And it was, what casualties are we facing this week? What has been done about it? What care have they had on the ground? How many people have died? What have they died of? What can we do about it? This feedback loop highlighted problems. It highlighted in some of the legacy kit and equipment that we had. So it led to this innovation, this incredible level of innovation, this ability to bring something into service and iterate and change. This is the Combat Application Tourniquet, okay? It was initially an off-the-shelf piece of equipment that we brought in because we realized that people were dying mainly because they had extreme hemorrhaging. Okay, they would lose a leg, a foot, an arm with these improvised explosive devices. Injuries that we're not used to seeing, they're rare. They became not so rare. So we brought in this piece of equipment. Now, lots of other things changed with it, okay? We wanted to work out, well, what can we do about this kit? What are we going to do? How are we going to use this kit? Is it fit for purpose? Is it going to change stuff? Yeah, great. We'll bring in a tourniquet that's going to stop bleeding. It's really simple to use. That's lightweight. But we needed to continue building. We need to continue to innovate because we needed people to be able to put the tourniquet on themselves. Because again, we're in a kinetic environment here. This isn't like something happens on the street, everyone goes quiet and you can just crack on and do stuff. It was, well, if someone's involved in this kind of strike, we need to prevent secondary strikes. We need to allow the person injured to do something about it themselves. So they needed to create the tourniquet or change the ability of the tourniquet for it to be applied yourself, but applied one-handed in case something the worst was to happen. It went through a number of iterations in a very short period of time. Okay? Initially, the buckle itself had no teeth. It was a buckle so we could go through. And the key part of this tourniquet for making it work is the windlass. The ability to tighten, okay, tighten to a point that you can't move your hands to lock stuff off. But when we talk about making it so that you can apply it yourself, it didn't have teeth. So teeth were added to the buckle. When you were applying it to a larger limb, it needed to go through the buckle and then back on itself. But when it was applied to your arm, or self-applied, it would only go through one buckle. So again, the change was like, well, how do you store it? How do you carry it? You don't know what type of casualty you're going to get. You don't know what type of injuries you're going to suffer. So we need to change the buckle. So now the buckle has changed again, so it just has to go through one. The locking system within the buckle has changed, so it can be applied, whether it's to a leg or an arm, and have the same level of traction. If anyone's medical or anyone's been involved in any medical incidents and stuff regarding tourniquets, whenever a tourniquet is applied, you are required, and this is since the dawn of time, even with the Samway anchor, you're supposed to write the time when the tourniquet was applied. This is so that the next level of care can do something about it, so that they're aware if something happened. It used to be written with a pencil, a skin marking pencil. It'd be written on the forehead, on the cheek, because on a resusciandol in a classroom, it works really, really well. Okay, in war, with the sweat, the heat, the blood, doesn't work so much. But the first tourniquet had nowhere where you could write. So again, an innovation was, why don't we just change that small strap that secures the windlass, and make it white, write time on it, take away the thought process from the person doing the work. That'd work. That'd make it easier. Back when I went to Kosovo, when I first joined the military, the medics had all the medical knowledge. The medics had all the medical equipment because they can only be trusted with it. They're trained better than everyone else. Well, we needed to change the way we're delivering stuff here. This is a very simple bit of kit and equipment, and everyone needs to be trained on it. Everyone needs to have this piece of kit and equipment because it's going to eventually save lives. Since it came into service in 2005, the mortality rate due to excessive bleeding has increased by 85%. Okay, 85% is the number of people that would have essentially died should the tourniquet have not come into service. That's a significant number on a very, very simple bit of kit. I mean, but how simple is it? Well, it comes like this. It's a really simple bit of kit. It's essentially a piece of canvas with some Velcro on. It goes over a limb if you needed it to. You pull it nice and tight. The Velcro goes back on itself. You would turn the windlass until it's tight. The bleeding would stop. Not too tight, ow. And then it's locked off. That's how you apply the tourniquet. It's pretty simple. When my arm goes blue, give me a shout. Okay, really simple. There are 5 steps, but there isn't really 5 steps. There's 4 steps because I guess step 3 and step 4 are the same, which is you tighten the windlass and you lock it off. Really simple, lightweight bit of kit. How simple, though? How simple is it? Have I got any volunteers? I'm not going to make you come on stage. I'll come to you. Anybody? Perfect. How many have I got? Volunteers, I mean. I'll give 4. I'll come out with 4. This is where I ruin all the mics and stuff. There's one for you. Oh, there's one for you. Anybody else? One for you, and up here. One for you. So what I'd like you to do, just really quickly, or well, really simply, should I say, not quickly, is I would like you to just slow time, just go through those steps, using one hand, no help. What I'd like you to do, so the first thing is, just put your injured hand through the loop. You wouldn't have time to take a photo of it, Kerry. Then I'd like you to grab the other end of the tourniquet where it's just velcroed back on itself, the little tab. I'd like you to just pull that till it goes tight in your arm, and then pull it back on itself, just so it's hand tight. No one can help you, you just got to use one hand. Once it's on, I'd like you to take that hand that's good and just turn the windlass a couple. Not too many. And then just put it back in its lock. Thankfully, you're not actually bleeding, so this is just an exercise. And then just put the little bit of tape over the little lock. You'll see it just where the windlass is, and that'll secure it in. Cool. So that's taken me about 1.5 minutes to show you how to use a tourniquet. So what we need to be able to do, because you've just done it under no pressure there, is I'd like you to take it off and just pull the Velcro off so it's back into its big loop. Kerry, you would have definitely died by now. Which is a shame, because your talk was really good. Okay, and just make it back into a loop. And when we're training people in this, obviously you don't just train, it's explanation, demonstration, imitation, practice. We need to know that people can apply the tourniquet for real in 60 seconds. Do you think you can do it? I think you can. Thankfully, I've got this stopwatch here. It's probably more than a minute. It was from Timu. Stop, clear, 1 minute. What I'd like to do is the same activity. You have 1 minute. Simple instruction, just don't die. Once you're done, raise your good arm. Oh, this is on light-saving mode. 1, 2, 3. So that's taken you 21 seconds. Okay, 21 seconds. Now you can take it off now. And you can just add that to your merch bag. You can have them. Okay, they're a gift. Excellent job. So that's just taken, you can see how simple the bit of equipment is. You can see how simple it is to apply. You can see how simple it is to teach. You just got to highlight the importance of using it. Now, if, in the worst case scenario, something was to happen and you didn't have that exact tourniquet and you could see someone's bleeding, then you can just apply the same principle, which is use something to go around the limb and use something to windlass it off like a pen, like we see in the films. The Combat Application Tourniquet has changed and revolutionized the way we do healthcare. But then what? So it didn't just change kit and equipment, it changed policy. Policy that's been in place for many, many, many years. Okay? The Operation Patient Care Pathway used to be, and has stood the test for a number of years, from point of injury, you would move through the different phases of care, very linear. You'd move from the buddy-buddy system to your medic, back to your regimental aid post, back to the next level, back to the next level, back to the next level. We changed that because we realized that when we're doing these feedback loops, the key was how can we get people back as quick as they can? There was other revolutionary changes in military medicine. The Medical Emergency Response Team, basically a trauma bay in the back of a hospital that was willing to fly anywhere. And what people used to say, when we were out on the ground in Afghanistan, if you could get someone onto the back of the aircraft alive, there's every chance, 99% survival rates of people that were getting back on the aircraft alive, because they had a trauma bay, they could have real blood in the back of an aircraft. We changed policy. We changed the algorithm, okay? Pre-hospital first aid, emergency first aid, it was always ABC. Airway, breathing, circulation. The whole algorithm has changed in the emergency medicine space. We've got to consider catastrophic hemorrhage. It's something you've got to consider. You can't be messing about with an airway if someone's got an arterial bleed. But it also changed the way we train. okay? We realised that every single medic having all the skill set and the capability to deliver the stuff is great, but that gives us a single point of failure. You need medics everywhere, and there isn't medics everywhere. There's soldiers everywhere. So every single person was trained on this vital bit of kit and equipment, arguably the biggest innovation in military medicine in the history of military medicine. It changed the way we did. Everyone was issued a tourniquet. Everyone was trained on a tourniquet. They didn't need to do a special course. It started right from when they went to basic training. We changed the way we briefed, okay? We changed the way we briefed. So during a deployment, an operational deployment, if we consider the field hospital, for example, which arguably was the biggest and busiest trauma hospital in the world at its peak, okay? The leadership team would go back to the UK 3 times a tour to speak to the people who were coming in. None of this hand over a big document and say, good luck. It would be go to their training. Say to them, this is what the tempo's like at the moment. This is what it's like now. Got any questions for me? Anything, hints and tips? We'll give you everything now. Total transparency. One of the things that used to come into confusion when we're in the hospital was, it's not a normal conventional hospital layout. It's a hospital that's made out of Corimet containers. It used to be tents, okay? But the layout isn't a conventional NHS layout. It doesn't make any sense. Well, how can we take away the confusion from the people training to come out there? So in York, okay, a place called AMSTC in Strensall, they built an exact replica layout of the hospital inside the hangar so that we could get this practice become permanent. So we could do real play versus role play and take away this. They would go here, then they would move into CT, then they would move to here. This is the exact layout, the exact dimensions of the trauma bays, so that we could realistically affect the training. We realized that lots of patients, lots of casualties were getting evacuated. Helicopters are big, they're loud, they're messy. So we needed to train people to understand what the dangers were on loading casualties onto aircraft. You would take all these things for granted, but these were the things where mistakes would be made. It didn't just stop with the military, okay? Okay, in the military, the casualties we were having in Iraq and Afghanistan were very volatile, complex polytrauma all of the time. Within the NHS, that's not the same. But the use of the tourniquet and people bleeding to death from small injuries, arterial bleeds, is absolutely an issue. The increase in knife crime, the increase in gun crime, the increase, unfortunately, to terrorist incidents within the UK. Look at the 7/7 bombings, Ariana Grande incident, these kind of things. So it would be remiss that the NHS didn't look at these things. So the Combat Application Tourniquet is given in the pre-hospital care space. It's something we've taken directly from the battlefield and used within the civilian industry. I'm also going to talk very quickly about another feedback loop, and there was a talk yesterday on psychological safety and about the ability for people to do stuff. Well, these are just paintings, but they're replicating, certainly this one here replicates a trauma bay within the hospital in Afghanistan and the hospital within Basra. The amount of people around a body, around a casualty in a trauma bay, okay, in the UK, I would say you're talking 2 or 3, maybe 4. In Afghanistan, you're talking 13, 14, 15. This is the highest trained clinical capability within a team. That team is made up of emergency medicine consultants, orthopedic surgeon, anaesthetists, trauma nurse coordinators, a radiographer, all around that significant experience. It's also made up of a scribe, someone who documents all of that work, and a runner. The runner could be ambulance driver off shift. And their job is to run from the trauma bay to get some kit, take it to the team to make sure they've got everything. When we talk about retrospectives, okay, and we talk about how we do things and everyone gets a voice and all that kind of stuff, we introduced kind of retrospectives after big, complex polytrauma cases to work out, are we doing everything we can? Now, the clinical capability and what we were delivering to the casualties was never in question, never. But are the processes right? Are we doing things right? This isn't the most experienced trauma lead or the trauma consultant saying, this is what happened, you were good, you were average, you were not too bad, that was good, good. T medals, call me when the next one comes in. This was an opportunity for every single person who was involved in the care of that patient to have a chat. How did you feel it went? How did you feel it went? How did you feel it went? So that we can increase the level of care for the patient. And one of the biggest improvements in care and time and administration came from the scribe. Okay? And I'll tell you what that was. The scribe's job is to write everything down in a document. Document when drugs go in, when a line goes in, when blood goes in. So that there is a record of stuff that's happened to that casualty that will follow that casualty throughout their journey of recovery. But when there's 13 people, and this is just one bay, there was 4 bays in the ED, by the way, and often all 4 bays were taken up, like this. So you can imagine the noise that generates. But the consultants don't care. They're just doing their stuff. The anaesthetist doesn't care. They're doing the head end, they're doing the airway. The nurses don't care. They're doing their bloods and they're shouting it out. But the scribe cares. So the scribe's got, I have an issue. I have an issue because it's too loud, I can't hear everything, I'm not writing everything down. So what I'm doing is I'm following you around just to try and get that noise, which is adding confusion. So what do you think we should do about it? Well, if you just put 2 whiteboards either side, and when you do something to that casualty, just write it down. Just write morphine this time, so that I don't have to question you. And they implemented this. Something so simple as a whiteboard and a pen in an emergency department changed the quality of care that we could give to our patients. A really simple intervention from the person who's a scribe, clinically the lowest qualified healthcare assistant. But they felt comfortable to say, hey, I think this will work. The feedback loops happen in theatre and they happen all the way back to the UK. So we've got every level of care covered, and the advances in clinical care were significant. What have I learned along the way? So feedback's important, really important. Establish early and consistent feedback, and these are things I try and take into my current role as an Agile coach. If there isn't a feedback mechanism in place, make one. Find it. Okay, it's not going to be easy. It might be getting feedback from the customer. Whatever it is, find it, make one, do something about it. Listen to your customer. In this instance, I'm referring to the people on the ground, the people treating the patients, the people at the closest, sharpest point of the knife to do something about it. And when you do get feedback, please implement something. Do some kind of improvement. Do something about it. And as I say, feedback's pretty important. But I'd just like to say, don't just take my word for it. And this is where the technology will fail me.
Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Ross Moy. I'm the British Army's Consultant Advisor in Pre-Hospital Emergency Care. And I'm going to talk to you about the use of tourniquets to deal with severe traumatic limb injuries. When I first joined the Army in the late 1990s, the use of tourniquets was basically a piece of Bunsen burner tubing on an anchor, and it was useless and probably quite dangerous. What we found on the outbreak of hostilities in Iraq and Afghanistan was that we were having casualties who were dying of avoidable bleeding from injuries to their limbs. And what we then introduced was the use of the Combat Application Tourniquet, which was a much better designed piece of equipment that worked very well to reduce the levels of death that we had. We also developed a system whereby casualties who were brought back to the UK via the Royal Air Force to Birmingham were discussed at a weekly meeting, and that immediately fed straight back into the training cycle. So what that meant was that the lived experience of the casualties that were arriving in the UK within a week was being fed back into the training cycle, so that we could make sure that what we were teaching our people going out on the next set of operations aligned with what was killing the casualties that were coming back to the UK.
Good day, my name is Simon Hummer, and I spent just over 17 years as a combat medic in the British Army. I soon found myself deployed out to Afghanistan in 2009, where I had to treat a great deal of them. And one of the key pieces of equipment that I used was the CAT tourniquet. And when I first joined the military, tourniquets were kind of vilified a little bit. They weren't used, and if they were used, it was under extreme protocols. But the CAT tourniquet actually changed survivability out in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I used the tourniquet on treating a patient of mine, a casualty of mine, who unfortunately lost both of his legs. Both of these, I had to use one on each leg, and that saved his life. And then later on, I found myself in a similar situation where I activated an improvised surrender device and lost both my legs. If it wasn't for the tourniquet, I wouldn't be sat here talking to you now. And it was one of the key things that absolutely saved my life. So I'm forever grateful for the development and use of the tourniquet, and obviously its application. I've got to play with my dog now because he's desperate for me to play ball with him.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Ormrod. I am a former Royal Marines Commando, and I was injured in service back on Christmas Eve 2007 whilst out on a routine foot patrol in Afghanistan. I, rather stupidly, stood on an improvised explosive device which resulted in me losing both my legs above the knee and my right arm above the elbow, and gaining me the unenviable title of the UK's first triple amputee from the conflict. The tourniquets were applied to the upper parts of my thigh where the tissue, the flesh and the muscle was still healthy. They were tightened adequately to stop the bleeding. I actually was involved in putting the tourniquet on my arm as part of the medic's way of keeping me active and responsive and awake and not slipping into a coma. I can honestly say, hand on heart, without the proper application of CAT tourniquets, I may not be here. Life's very different now. Lots has gone on in the last 18 years. Lots of very good, lots of very positive things, things that I'm very grateful for, and things that I would not have been able to achieve or experience had it not been, in the majority on that day, for the application of those CAT tourniquets. So they're very good.
Si Harmer is a very good friend of mine. We did the same job in Afghanistan. He would train people to how to use the tourniquets, and like he said there, unfortunately, he operated and improvised explosive device, lost both his legs. And it was the lads that he'd train weekly, daily, whenever there was downtime, that background activity, who put the tourniquets on that saved his life, which is, again, a testament to the kit and equipment and the feedback loops. You know, it's the ability to get feedback, get real data, get real information, and do something about it. Thank you very much for taking the time to come in. It is before lunch. I guess, in the spirit of the talk, please do leave some feedback. That would be great. Unless it's bad feedback, then you can take it with you to lunch. So yeah, please leave positive feedback. Thank you very much. I will quite happily take any questions whatsoever.
Thank you, Matt, for an incredible presentation. Right, I'm going to come up there for the first question.
Thank you, that was fascinating. That was really, really interesting. I had a clarifying question about sorry, I can't remember what you call it, but like, the situation room or wherever you actually had the beds, and you had your 13 specialists rallied around the casualty. So you mentioned that there were, you mentioned that there were 2 whiteboards. One of the interventions was to have 2 whiteboards and someone sort of writing down exactly what was being administered, whether it was morphine or whatever. So was that like the anaesthetist or the nurse, the actual practitioners writing on the whiteboard, or was it the scribe?
No, the scribe is stood at the head end, funny, a lectern like this, and then what they were doing was you'd shout out. So lots of people shouting out. So now what you had is anyone doing any intervention to that casualty would just do the intervention, write it on the board. Right on the board, right on the board. When you're in trauma situations, there's things like certain drugs that are always used. So there would be a question of those drugs would be listed on. Again, an iteration on the improvement would be the drugs were listed on there, and you could just write the timings on so that people would know. And it was basically whoever did the intervention. Now that half a second of doing that bit of work prevented the scribe sort of like scuttling behind on the shoulder saying, how much did you give? When did you give it? And again, it's about improving the system or the effectiveness of the system versus the level of clinical care.
Yeah, no, interesting. Because I guess like the behaviour change is always the hard thing when you're in it and you're doing it, but that's genius. There's not a lot of behaviour change required. It's literally just articulating the thing that you're already doing so someone else can write it.
Yeah, and it is simplifying stuff because the documentation is important. The priority, you know, if we, again, refer back to like Agile stuff, the priority is making sure what you're doing works, right? Working stuff, making sure the interventions you're doing are making a difference. But the documentation is really important. Do you know what I mean? Because the problem is, if you don't annotate certain things on there, and that's questioned at the next level of care, they might just go, well, we'll just give it again. Or, because we don't know, that writes these options off. So it's just the importance of those, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. Thank you.
Thank you.
The army, I mean, I'm making an assumption here, but the army is notoriously hierarchical. Mm-hmm. So how did it go with the feedback loops? And was it difficult at first because of that hierarchy to actually have the feedback loops, or was it something that everyone was actually very open to engaging in?
I think it's a really good question. I think when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to being at that moment, this wasn't a business saying we need to have feedback loops and we're not interested. The people in the room, the consultants, Ross, for example, who's on the short video, he's a defence consultant advisor, and it was a question of we've got to do something, because if we don't, the results are going to be the same. So having this feedback loop of this is what we need to do, this is the real data, this is the real casualties we're getting, and this is the mortality rate, and we need to fix that. The thing that, again, from experience, and if anyone experienced anything, bringing anything new into the military, I guess it's like a big business and everything takes significant amount of time. And what this did was it cut that time. You could go from an instance happening in theatre with a change in the casualties we're getting. It would be brought up in that weekly session. It would then be fed into the team that was coming out. It would be fed back into theatre, and we would change policy. One of the incidents, for example, was everyone used to be issued with a single tourniquet. Everyone on the ground, it's single tourniquet, single dress, and then you'd be issued a morphine, okay? It was like, well, actually, it's complex polytrauma. One tourniquet might not be enough. If you're using a tourniquet on someone else, you might need more than one. And it was something as simple as that, well, we'll just issue everyone with 2 tourniquets. Again, it's just those simple things where a tourniquet was applied here, but there was a number of improvised tourniquets applied. So we need to increase that level. Little things like the clinical team, the medics, the people who were trained, and the team medics, they were the people with the med kit who will realise, well, actually, what if the medic gets hit? What if you're in a situation where you can't just walk up? What if you're still in a permissive environment? So you don't have the freedom to just walk up and do stuff. So we've got to train everybody to do the simple stuff. And it was those small changes in policy, in Afghanistan, it went right back to sort of phase 1 training. Their whole approach to that initial first aid was we now start using tourniquets. Whereas before, again, even a year before we started using them, tourniquets were still bad. Just don't do it, because if you put a tourniquet on, your leg will fall off. So it was the change in policies that was the biggest. For me, for my career, I spent 23 years, and fortunate enough, I was involved in all of this. So I was the medic on the ground using a Samway anchor. I was a medic on a section when the tourniquets were issued. Later on in my career, I was training people how to use the tourniquets. Later on, I was involved in writing the training about how we deal with people in a pre-hospital space. And so the reason, again, I guess that this is really important to me is I've been fortunate/unfortunate enough to be involved in every level of the feedback loop. So, yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. So my question is about resistance to change. How quick was the change implemented? And I know there's a lot of bureaucracy in place when it comes to health issues, but how did that change? How was that managed? And when we think in terms of the Agile world, because we deliver value to clients and all that, how do you relate the resistance to change experience during this time, changing from an equipment that has been in existence for a long time to a new one, and relate it to the world of Agile, where we sometimes have to deal with resistance from stakeholders or from management upper level, changing ways of working or things? Thank you.
Okay, just to unpick bits of that. I think the first thing, that there wasn't much resistance to change, and I know this isn't relative to business, because the reason there wasn't much resistance to change was because of this. Okay, if you're saying we need to do something about this, where does the resistance come from? Money is no option, by the way. When this is happening, this is on the telly, money is no option. The defence budget gets bigger, things get quicker. Okay, and this was the thing, so there was no resistance to change. And if you were to like it like a business, some of the bigger businesses lose track of the element of this, if you want. This is about people's lives. Business is about maybe people's livelihoods and the amount of profit or whatever, or the amount of business you're losing. So it's about getting people on the same page. One of the things that we didn't have a problem with is alignment and vision and purpose. There was absolutely a requirement for it. And I think with resistance to change, the first thing you've got to look at is, how do I get everyone on the same page? How do we get everyone to understand that we're all pushing in the same direction? Not an issue in the military. Never was an issue in the military.
Thank you. Just a really quick question. How long did it take for that iterative process of the tourniquets to happen? So you showed us several different versions. Do you have any idea of how long it took from the first to the final version?
Yeah, so the first ones came into theatre in 2005. Gen 7, I think, was around 2020. But here you've got Gen 3, Gen 6, Gen 7. They're the main 3 iterations. We're still on Gen 7. And at the moment, obviously, in 2015, the conflicts kind of stopped. So the data kind of stopped. So it's got to a point where the Gen 7, which you've just tried, or the ones that are out there, that's the level of the tourniquet that exists now. It's almost been through every iteration to be the perfect bit of kit. It's lightweight, even so much as the Velcro is different, so it doesn't get clogged up with fluid. Do you know what I mean? It's these simple things. The iteration was quick. One of the biggest things, arguably the thing that was quicker than the kit developing, was how we used it. That was really quick, going through 1 loop versus going through 2 loops, because it would loosen. But one of the things that was interesting, because of that feedback loop, it was actually a badly applied tourniquet in a trauma situation. There isn't much of a problem, because people are going to keep twiddling it until the bleeding stops. That's the combat indicator that it's working. But then it was the small incremental changes, like the windlass. The original windlass was a lot thinner, so there was a danger it would crack, so it got thicker. As I say, the ability to write time on it, these were quick. Some of these changes could happen within 3-6 months. And the biggest issue and the biggest thing, I think, which sometimes is different in businesses, just because there's a Gen 7 doesn't mean this one doesn't work, doesn't mean this one doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? They all still absolutely did their job. So the phasing out and phasing back in, it wasn't a question of, right, stop, give us all your Gen 6s because they're not working anymore. It was, we need to improve it. So everyone who's getting issued, the next one will be Gen 7. So it was that, if it still works, still use it.
Hi, yeah, thanks for that. I guess my question is building on those two things, really. You got the feedback loop had to be really quick, and there was no resistance to change. Obviously, as you said now, there's not much requirement for any more innovation. So how do you, what are your thoughts on maintaining that feedback loop, maintaining that innovation on something that isn't perceived as being necessary now, but we don't want to fall into the situation where we've got the old style tourniquet and everyone thinks it's pants again?
It's a really good question. So one of the things I want to keep is this is what fascinates me, is obviously in this instance, the kit and equipment from the battlefield, biggest innovation in pre-hospital emergency care, was introduced into the NHS. The feedback loop comes the other way when there's no conflict. So advances in medicine at the NHS is then fed into the military. The reality is, when we talk about military hospitals, they don't exist. Okay, they used to exist. Okay, there used to be big military hospitals, and everyone in there was military, and every nurse was a military nurse, and every doctor was a military doctor. Surgeons were military, and the patients were all military. It's not really viable because cost, because of quality of care, because of casualties going in the door. So all of the NHS clinicians, or all of the military clinicians, should I say, all are seconded to the NHS. So you have that. If you're a plastic surgeon and you're in the military and nothing's happening, you're not like, well, I'll put my skills somewhere else. You're in the NHS. You're embedded in the NHS. So advances in medicine, advances in pre-hospital drugs, advances all those things just get fed in the other way. But it's an interesting thing because, like I said, when I joined, I mean, it makes me feel like a bit of a like Dad's Army back in my day, which is bad. I didn't think I'd ever say that. But like when I joined, it was like the kit and equipment was just, no one whinged. You know, no one was like, oh God, the stretchers are wooden. No one cared. They were just like, that's the stretcher you're using. And it works because you carry people with it. It's only an issue when it's an issue. And I think that's the thing with conflict, and certainly when we need to improve stuff. In Afghanistan, I'm just touching on the iceberg of medical kit here. We had vehicles where, for anyone who's tried to bring a vehicle into service, by the way, in the military, it takes forever. What they call the defence lines of development, genuinely, it is the most laborious process for a number of reasons. In Afghanistan, as soon as you realise is that the vehicles were getting blown up and had no protection, they got different vehicles off the shelf. They got a vehicle with an inverted hull, should I say, in the Jackal, so that if it's involved in an ID, which it will be, all of the blast is deflected away from the people. We brought in things like the Mastiff ambulance. This is a huge, huge armoured ambulance, when, again, we've still got the battlefield ambulance that I was in Kosovo, and I think the same registration still exists. But the other kit and equipment was rapidly brought in. And I think that's the... I think that's the game changer. Is if things need improving, then they find a way to improve it.
Incredible. So that brings us to time, everyone. So if we give Matt another round of applause, really interesting session.